You won't believe the adrenaline-packed tales in Rifleman Harris, an electrifying memoir by Benjamin Harris, a fearless rifleman in the British Army during the high-stakes Napoleonic Wars. This book catapults you into Harris's jaw-dropping adventures and dangerous exploits as a soldier in the elite 95th Rifles. Let's begin. My father was a shepherd, and I was a sheep boy from my earliest youth. Indeed, as soon almost as I could run, I began helping my father to look after the sheep on the downs of Blandford, in Dorsetshire, where I was born. Whilst I continued to tend the flocks and herds under my charge, and occasionally, in the long winter nights, to learn the art of making shoes, I grew a hardy little chap, and was one fine day in the year 1802, drawn as a soldier for the Army of Reserve. Thus, without troubling myself much about the change which was to take place in the hitherto quiet routine of my days, I was drafted into the 66th Regiment of Foot, bid goodbye to my shepherd companions, and was obliged to leave my father without an assistant to collect his flocks, just as he was beginning more than ever to require one, nay, indeed, I may say to want tending and looking after himself, for old age and infirmity were coming on him. His hair was growing as white as the sleet of our downs, and his countenance becoming as furrowed as the ploughed fields around. However, as I had no choice in the matter, it was quite as well that I did not grieve over my fate. My father tried hard to buy me off, and would have persuaded the sergeant of the 66th that I was of no use as a soldier, from having maimed my right hand, by breaking the forefinger when a child. The sergeant, however, said I was just the sort of little chap he wanted, and off he went, carrying me, amongst a batch of recruits he had collected, away with him. Almost the first soldiers I ever saw were those belonging to the corps in which I was now enrolled a member, and, on arriving at Winchester, we found the whole regiment there in quarters. Whilst lying at Winchester, where we remained 3 months, young as I was in the profession, I was picked out, amongst others, to perform a piece of duty that, for many years afterwards, remained deeply impressed upon my mind, and gave me the first impression of the stern duties of a soldier's life. A private of the 70th Regiment had deserted from that corps, and afterwards enlisted into several other regiments. Indeed, I was told at the time, though I cannot answer for so great a number, that 16 different times he had received the bounty and then stolen off. Being, however, caught at last, he was brought to trial at Portsmouth, and sentenced by General Court-Martial to be shot. The 66th received a route to Portsmouth, to be present on the occasion, and, as the execution would be a good hint to us young uns, there were 4 lads picked out of our corps to assist in this piece of duty, myself being one of the number chosen. Besides these men, 4 soldiers from 3 other regiments were ordered on the firing party, making 16 in all. The place of execution was Portsdown Hill, near Hilsea Barracks, and the different regiments assembled must have composed a force of about 15,000 men, having been assembled from the Isle of Wight, from Chichester, Gosport, and other places. The sight was very imposing, and appeared to make a deep impression on all there. As for myself, I felt that I would have given a good round sum, had I possessed it, to have been in any situation rather than the one in which I now found myself, and when I looked into the faces of my companions, I saw, by the pallor and anxiety depicted in each countenance, the reflection of my own feelings. When all was ready, we were moved to the front, and the culprit was brought out. He made a short speech to the parade, acknowledging the justice of his sentence, and that drinking and evil company had brought the punishment upon him. He behaved himself firmly and well, and did not seem at all to flinch. After being blindfolded, he was desired to kneel down behind a coffin, which was placed on the ground, and the drum major of the Hilsea depot, giving us an expressive glance, we immediately commenced loading. This was done in the deepest silence, and, the next moment, we were primed and ready. There was then a dreadful pause for a few moments, and the drum major, again looking towards us, gave the signal before agreed upon, a flourish of his cane, and we levelled and fired. We had been previously strictly enjoined to be steady, and take good aim, and the poor fellow, pierced by several balls, fell heavily upon his back, and as he lay, with his arms pinioned to his sides, I observed that his hands waved for a few moments, like the fins of a fish when in the agonies of death. The drum major also observed the movement, and, making another signal, 4 of our party immediately stepped up to the prostrate body, and placing the muzzles of their pieces to the head, fired, and put him out of his misery. The different regiments then fell back by companies, and the word being given to march past in slow time, when each company came in line with the body, the word was given to mark time, and then eyes left, in order that we might all observe the terrible example. We then moved onwards, and marched from the ground to our different quarters. The 66th stopped that night about 3 miles from Portsdown Hill, and in the morning we returned to Winchester. The officer in command that day, I remember, was General Whitelock, who was afterwards brought to court-martial himself. This was the first time of our seeing that officer. The next meeting was at Buenos Aires, and during the confusion of that day one of us received an order from the fiery Crawford to shoot the traitor dead if he could see him in the battle, many others of the Rifles receiving the same order from that fine and chivalrous officer. The unfortunate issue of the Buenos Aires affair is matter of history, and I have nothing to say about it, but I well remember the impression it made upon us all at the time, and that Sir John Moore was present at Whitelock's court-martial, General Crawford, and I think General Orp Muty, Captain Elader of the Rifles, Captain Dixon, and one of our privates, being witnesses. We were at Hythe at the time, and I recollect our officers going off to appear against Whitelock. So enraged was Crawford against him, that I heard say he strove hard to have him shot. Whitelock's father I also heard was at his son's trial, and cried like an infant during the proceedings. Whitelock's sword was broken over his head, I was told, and for months afterwards, when our men took their glass, they used to give as a toast success to grey hairs, but bad luck to Whitelock's. Indeed, that toast was drunk in all the public houses around for many a day. Everything was new to me, I remember, and I was filled with astonishment at the bustling contrast I was so suddenly called into from the tranquil and quiet of my former life. Whilst in Winchester, we got a route for Ireland, and embarking at Portsmouth, crossed over and landed at Cork. There we remained 9 weeks, and being a smart figure and very active, I was put into the light company of the 66th, and, together with the light corps of other regiments, we were formed into light battalions, and sent off to Dublin. Whilst in Dublin, I one day saw a corps of the 95th Rifles, and fell so in love with their smart, dashing, and devil-may-care appearance, that nothing would serve me till I was a rifleman myself. So, on arriving at Cashel one day, and falling in with a recruiting party of that regiment, I volunteered into the Second Battalion. This recruiting party were all Irishmen, and had been sent over from England to collect, amongst others, men from the Irish militia, and were just about to return to England. I think they were as reckless and devil-may-care a set of men as ever I beheld, either before or since. Being joined by a sergeant of the 92nd Highlanders, and a Highland piper of the same regiment, also a pair of real rollicking blades, I thought we should all have gone mad together. We started on our journey, one beautiful morning, in tip-top spirits, from the Royal Oak, at Cashel, the whole lot of us, early as it was, being 3 sheets in the wind. When we paraded before the door of the Royal Oak, the landlord and landlady of the inn, who were quite as lively, came reeling forth, with 2 decanters of whisky, which they thrust into the fists of the sergeants, making them a present of decanters and all, to carry along with them, and refresh themselves on the march. The piper then struck up, the sergeants flourished their decanters, and the whole route commenced a terrific yell. We then all began to dance, and dance through the town, every now and then stopping for another pull at the whisky decanters. Thus we kept it up till we had danced, drank, shouted, and piped 13 Irish miles, from Cashel to Clonmel. Such a day, I think, I never spent, as I enjoyed with these fellows, and on arriving at Clonmel, we were as glorious as any soldiers in all Christendom need wish to be. In about 10 days after this, our sergeants had collected together a good batch of recruits, and we started for England. Some few days before we embarked, as if we had not been bothered enough already with the unruly paddies, we were nearly pestered to death with a detachment of old Irish women, who came from different parts, on hearing of their sons having enlisted, in order to endeavour to get them away from us. Following us down to the water's edge, they hung to their offspring, and, dragging them away, sent forth such dismal howls and moans that it was quite distracting to hear them. The lieutenant commanding the party, ordered me, being the only Englishman present, to endeavour to keep them back. It was, however, as much as I could do to preserve myself from being torn to pieces by them, and I was glad to escape out of their hands. At length we got our lads safe on board, and set sail for England. No sooner were we out at sea, however, than our troubles began afresh with these hot-headed paddies, for, having now nothing else to do, they got up a dreadful quarrel amongst themselves, and a religious row immediately took place, the Catholics reviling the Protestants to such a degree that a general fight ensued. The poor Protestants, being few in number, soon got the worst of it, and as fast as we made matters up among them, they broke out afresh and began the riot again. From Pill, where we landed, we marched to Bristol, and thence to Bath. Whilst in Bath, our Irish recruits roamed about the town, staring at and admiring everything they saw, as if they had just been taken wild in the woods. They all carried immense shillelaghs in their fists, which they would not quit for a moment. Indeed, they seemed to think their very lives depended on possession of these bludgeons, being ready enough to make use of them on the slightest occasion. From Bath we marched to Andover, and when we came upon Salisbury Plain, our Irish friends got up a fresh row. At first they appeared uncommonly pleased with the scene, and, dispersing over the soft carpet of the downs, commenced a series of Irish jigs, till at length as one of the Catholics was setting to his partner, a Protestant, he gave a whoop and a leap into the air, and at the same time, as if he couldn't bear the partnership of a heretic any longer, dealt him a tremendous blow with his shillelagh, and stretched him upon the sod. This was quite enough, and the bludgeons immediately began playing away at a tremendous rate. The poor Protestants were again quickly disposed of, and then arose a cry of Huzzah for the Wicklow boys, Huzzah for the Connaught boys, Huzzah for Munster, and Huzzah for Ulster. They then recommenced the fight as if they were determined to make an end of their soldiering altogether upon Salisbury Plains. We had, I remember, 4 officers with us, and they did their best to pacify their pugnacious recruits. One thrust himself amongst them, but was instantly knocked down for his pains, so that he was glad enough to escape. After they had completely tired themselves, they began to slacken in their endeavours, and apparently to feel the effect of the blows they dealt each other, and at length suffering themselves to be pacified, the officers got them into Andover. Scarcely had we been a couple of hours there, and obtained some refreshment, ere these incorrigible blackguards again commenced quarrelling, and, collecting together in the streets, created so serious a disturbance that the officers, getting together a body of constables, seized some of the most violent and succeeded in thrusting them into the town jail. Upon this their companions again collected, and endeavoured to break open the prison gates. Baffled in this attempt, they rushed through the streets knocking down every body they met. The drums now commenced beating up for a volunteer corps of the town, which, quickly mustering, drew up in the street before the jail, and immediately were ordered to load with ball. This somewhat pacified the rioters, and our officers persuading them to listen to a promise of pardon for the past, peace was at length restored amongst them. The next day we marched for Ashford, in Kent, where I joined the 95th Rifles, and about 6 months after my joining, 4 companies of the Second Battalion were ordered on the expedition to Denmark. We embarked at Deal, and sailing for the hostile shores, landed on a little place called, I think, Scarlet Island, somewhere between Elsinore and Copenhagen. The expedition consisted of about 30,000 men, and at the moment of our getting on shore, the whole force set up one simultaneous and tremendous cheer, a sound I cannot describe, it seemed so inspiring. This, indeed, was the first time of my hearing the style in which our men give tongue when they get near the enemy, though afterwards my ears became pretty well accustomed to such sounds. As soon as we got on shore, the rifles were pushed forward as the advance, in chain order, through some thick woods of fir, and when we had cleared these woods and approached Copenhagen, sentries were posted on the roads and openings leading towards the town, in order to intercept all comers, and prevent all supplies. Such posts we occupied for about 3 days and nights, whilst the town was being fired on by our shipping. I rather think this was the first time of Congreve rockets being brought into play, and as they rushed through the air in the dark, they appeared like so many fiery serpents, creating, I should think, terrible dismay among the besieged. As the main army came up, we advanced and got as near under the walls of the place as we could without being endangered by the fire from our own shipping. We now received orders ourselves to commence firing, and the rattling of the guns I shall not easily forget. I felt so much exhilaration that I could hardly keep back, and was checked by the commander of the company, Captain Leach, who called me by name to keep my place. About this time, my front rank man, a tall fellow named Jack Johnson, showed a disposition as though the firing had on him an effect the reverse of what it had on many others of the company, for he seemed inclined to hang back, and once or twice turned round in my face. I was a rear rank man, and porting my piece, in the excitement of the moment I swore that if he did not keep his ground, I would shoot him dead on the spot, so that he found it would be quite as dangerous for him to return as to go on. I feel sorry to recall the want of courage of this man, but I do so with the less pain as it gives me the opportunity of saying that during many years' arduous service, it is the only instance I remember of a British soldier endeavouring to hold back when his comrades were going forward. Indeed, Johnson was never again held in estimation amongst the Rifle Corps, for the story got wind that I had threatened to shoot him for cowardice in the field, and Lieutenant Cox mentioned to the colonel that he had overheard my doing so, and such was the contempt the man was held in by the Rifles, that he was soon afterwards removed from amongst us to a veteran battalion. Whilst in Denmark we led a tolerably active life, the Rifles being continually on the alert, ordered hither today, and countermanded the next. Occasionally, too, when wanted in a hurry, we were placed in carts, and rattled over the face of the country, in company with the dragoons of the German Legion, so that, if we had not so much fighting as afterwards in the peninsula, we had plenty of work to keep us from idleness. Occasionally, also, we had some pleasant adventures among the blue-eyed Danish lasses, for the Rifles were always terrible fellows in that way. One night, I remember, a party of us had possession of a gentleman's house, in which his family were residing. The family consisted of the owner of the mansion, his wife, and 5 very handsome daughters, besides their servants. The first night of our occupation of the premises the party was treated with the utmost civility, and everything was set before us as if we had been their equals, for although it was not very pleasant to have a company of foreign soldiers in the house, it was doubtless thought best to do everything possible to conciliate such guests. Accordingly, on this night, a large party of the Green Jackets unceremoniously sat down to tea with the family. 5 beautiful girls in a drawing-room were rather awkward companions for a set of rough and ready riflemen, unscrupulous and bold, and I cannot say I felt easy. All went on very comfortably for some time. Our fellows drank their tea very genteelly, whilst one young lady presided at the urn to serve it out, and the others sat on each side of their father and mother, chatting to us, and endeavouring to make themselves as agreeable as they could. By and by, however, some of our men expressed themselves dissatisfied with tea and toast, and demanded something stronger, and liquors were accordingly served to them. This was followed by more familiarity, and, the ice once broken, all respect for the host and hostess was quickly lost. I had feared this would prove the case, and on seeing several of the men commence pulling the young ladies about, kissing them, and proceeding to other acts of rudeness, I saw that matters would quickly get worse, unless I interfered. Jumping up, therefore, I endeavoured to restore order, and upbraided them with the blackguardism of their behaviour after the kindness with which we had been used. This remonstrance had some effect, and when I added that I would immediately go in quest of an officer, and report the first man I saw ill use the ladies, I at length succeeded in extricating them from their persecutors. The father and mother were extremely grateful to me for my interference, and I kept careful guard over the family whilst we remained in that house, which luckily was not long. Soon after this the expedition returned to England, and I came, with others of the Rifles, in a Danish man of war, the Princess Caroline, and landed at Deal, from whence we had started. From Deal we marched to Hythe, and there we lay until the year 1808, and in that year 4 companies of the Second Battalion, to which I belonged, were ordered to Portugal. In that year I first saw the French. This concludes the first part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. What do you think of Harris' story? Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.